The morning sun cast long shadows across the Terra Defense Institute as a strange figure walked through the main gates. Zekthara stood nearly 8 feet tall with dark green scales covering his reptilian body. His yellow eyes scanned the human. Military academy with curiosity and something that looked like hunger. He had traveled thousands of light years to reach this small planet called Earth, and he had very specific reasons for being here. The Galactic Educational Consortium had started a new program 6 months ago. Young aliens from different worlds could now study at human military schools. Most species in the galaxy thought humans were weak and primitive. They had only joined the galactic community 50 years ago, which made them babies compared to civilizations that had existed for thousands of years. But Zekthara had heard rumors about human warfare that made him interested. Colonel Jake Morrison waited for the alien student in his office. He was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes that had seen too many battles. When Zekthara entered, the colonel stood up and extended his hand in the human greeting gesture. The alien looked at the hand with confusion before awkwardly shaking it with his clawed fingers. "Welcome to the Terra Defense Institute," Morrison said. "I hope your journey from the Vorthek homeworld was comfortable." Zekthara tilted his head. "Journey was acceptable. I am here to learn human-killing methods. My people heard humans are efficient at eliminating enemies despite being young species." Morrison's expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes. "We'll discuss your curriculum shortly. First, let me introduce you to Dr. Lisa Hamilton. She handles orientation for all exchange students." Dr. Hamilton was a woman in her 40s with brown hair pulled back in a simple style. She wore the standard academy uniform but had a medical badge on her collar. When she met Zekthara, she smiled warmly and gestured for him to follow her to a nearby conference room. "Please have a seat," she said, pointing to a specially made chair that could accommodate his larger frame. "I need to explain how our academy works before you begin classes." Zekthara settled into the chair with obvious impatience. "I do not need long explanations. I want to learn how humans kill enemies so effectively. My people are warriors, but we have heard humans developed new methods despite being primitive." Dr. Hamilton opened a tablet and began scrolling through information. "Our curriculum focuses on several key areas: defense strategies, tactical planning, peacekeeping operations, conflict resolution, and humanitarian law. Students learn to minimize casualties while achieving mission objectives." The alien's forked tongue flicked out in what was probably confusion. Minimize casualties? Why would warriors want to keep enemies alive? Dead enemies cannot fight back. "That's an interesting perspective," Dr. Hamilton said carefully. "Human military doctrine has evolved over many centuries. We've learned that the most effective solutions often involve preserving life rather than taking it." Zekthara made a sound that might have been laughter. "Humans must be very confident in their killing abilities to show such mercy. This is why I am here. I want to learn these advanced techniques that make you so certain of victory." Dr. Hamilton exchanged a glance with Colonel Morrison, who had been listening from the doorway. The colonel stepped into the room and sat down across from the alien student. "Zekthara," Morrison said, "I think there might be some misunderstanding about what we teach here. Our students learn to protect people, not harm them. They study how to end conflicts with the least amount of violence possible." The alien's yellow eyes narrowed. "But you must teach killing methods. How else do you end conflicts?" "In Vorthek culture, we eliminate threats completely. Quick death prevents future problems." Morrison nodded slowly. "Your people have their own traditions, and we respect that. But human military training emphasizes something different. We believe the strongest warriors are those who can win without destroying their enemies." Zekthara stood up abruptly, his scales making a soft rustling sound. "I do not understand this weakness. If humans are truly effective warriors, why do you refuse to share your killing techniques? Are you afraid other species will become stronger than you?" Dr. Hamilton looked at her tablet again. "Tomorrow you'll meet your fellow students. They're cadets Danny Martinez, Kelly Brooks, and Chris Johnson. They're all in their final year of training. I think working with them will help you understand our approach better. The alien sat back down, but his posture remained tense. These human students will teach me what you will not. They will show me how humans eliminate enemies so efficiently. Colonel Morrison stood up and walked to the window that overlooked the training grounds. Below, groups of cadets were practicing formation drills and tactical exercises. Zekthara, I want you to observe carefully during your time here. Watch how our students approach problems. Notice what they consider important. Pay attention to what they call victory. I will watch, the alien said. And I will learn what makes human warriors so feared throughout the galaxy, even though you pretend to be peaceful. Dr. Hamilton finished entering information into her tablet. Your quarters are in Building C, room 247. Meals are served in the main cafeteria at 0700, 1200 and 1800 hours. Classes begin tomorrow at 0800. Do you have any questions about the schedule or facilities? Zekthara shook his head. I have only one question. When will I learn the killing methods? How long must I wait before you trust me with human warfare? Secrets? Morrison turned back from the window. Trust isn't the issue here. Understanding is? Give it time, and I think you'll discover things about human warfare that will surprise you. The alien left the office with obvious frustration. As he walked down the corridor toward his quarters, he passed groups of human students. They looked so small and fragile compared to Vorthic warriors. Their skin was soft, their bodies weak, their movements careful rather than aggressive. Yet somehow these creatures had developed reputation as formidable fighters among the galactic community. That evening, Zekthara stood at his window looking out at the academy grounds. Human students moved in organized groups, their voices carrying across the courtyard as they discussed their studies. He listened carefully, hoping to overhear conversations about combat techniques or battle strategies. Instead, he heard discussions about protecting civilians, minimizing collateral damage, and something called rules of engagement. Tomorrow, he would meet his human classmates directly. Perhaps they would be more willing to share information than their instructors. Perhaps they would finally explain how such a weak-looking species had earned respect as warriors throughout the galaxy. Zekthara was determined to learn their secrets, no matter how long it took. The next morning arrived with the sound of bells echoing across the academy grounds. Zekthara had barely slept, his mind racing with anticipation about finally learning human warfare techniques. He dressed quickly in the modified uniform that had been provided for him and made his way to the cafeteria, where he was supposed to meet his human classmates. The dining hall buzzed with conversation as hundreds of cadets ate their breakfast. Zekthara spotted the three humans he was meant to work with sitting at a corner table. Danny Martinez was a stocky young man with dark hair and serious eyes. Kelly Brooks had blonde hair tied back in regulation style and seemed to be explaining something to the others using hand gestures. Chris Johnson was tall and thin with red hair and freckles, and he kept nodding as Kelly spoke. When Zekthara approached their table, the conversation stopped. The three humans looked up at him with curious but friendly expressions. Danny stood up first and extended his hand in the greeting gesture. You must be Zekthara, Danny said. We heard we'd be working with an exchange student. I'm Danny Martinez. The alien shook the offered hand, still finding the gesture strange. Yes, I am here to learn from you. I want to know about human killing methods. My people heard humans are very good at eliminating enemies. Kelly and Chris exchanged a quick glance. Kelly cleared her throat and gestured for Zekthara to sit down. Well, that's an interesting way to start a conversation. What exactly did your people tell you about human military training? Zekthara settled into a chair that creaked under his weight. They said humans developed efficient ways to kill despite being weak physically. They said human warriors can defeat stronger enemies using advanced techniques. I came here to learn these methods. Chris leaned forward with a puzzled expression. I think there might be some confusion here. We don't really focus on killing enemies. Most of our training is about protecting people and ending conflicts peacefully when possible. The alien's yellow eyes flicked between the three humans. But you must know killing techniques. How else do you win battles? In Vortha culture, we eliminate threats completely. Dead enemies cannot cause future problems. Danny took a sip of his coffee before responding. That's one way to look at it, I guess. But we've learned that creating dead enemies often creates new problems. Their families want revenge, their allies become more hostile, their people lose trust in peaceful solutions. Zekthara made the sound that was his species' version of confusion. So you allow enemies to live? They can attack you again later? This seems like poor strategy. Kelly smiled, but it wasn't a mocking expression. Actually, it's probably the most advanced strategy humans have developed. When you defeat someone but let them live with dignity, they're more likely to become an ally instead of seeking revenge. The alien stared at her as if she had said something impossible. You turn enemies into allies? How is this possible? Once someone fights against you, they will always be your enemy. Chris shook his head. Not necessarily. Humans learned this lesson the hard way over many centuries of warfare. Some of our closest allies today were once our greatest enemies. Countries that fought terrible wars against each other now work together peacefully. Captain Sam Richards approached their table before Zekthara could respond. He was a muscular man in his 30s with several scars visible on his hands and neck. Cadet Zekthara, I'm Captain Richards, your tactical instructor. Are you ready for your first simulation? Exercise? The alien stood up immediately, excited at the prospect of finally seeing human combat techniques in action. Yes, I am ready to learn. Will you show me how humans eliminate enemies efficiently? Captain Richards led the group toward the simulation center, with the 3 human cadets following behind. Today's exercise is a hostage rescue scenario. Your mission is to neutralize the threat and rescue 7 civilians without casualties. Zekthara felt his excitement growing. A hostage rescue would surely require advanced killing techniques to eliminate the hostage takers quickly and precisely. This was exactly what he wanted to learn. The simulation chamber was a large room with holographic projectors that could create realistic environments. As the exercise began, Zekthara found himself in what appeared to be an office building with multiple floors and many rooms. Computer-generated hostage takers moved through the building while innocent civilians cowered in various locations. Remember, Captain Richards said, through their communication devices, primary objective is civilian safety. Secondary objective is mission completion with minimal casualties to all parties involved. Zekthara paused in confusion. Minimal casualties to all parties? Do you mean we should not kill the hostage takers? Danny's voice came through the comm system. That's right. Our goal is to end this situation with everyone alive if possible. We use non-lethal methods first, lethal force only as a last resort. The alien watched in amazement as the human cadets began their operation. Instead of charging in with weapons, blazing, they spent considerable time gathering information about the building layout, the number of hostage takers, and the location of civilians. They used surveillance equipment to monitor the situation and identify the best approach. Kelly positioned herself as a sniper, but Zekthara noticed her weapon was loaded with tranquilizer darts rather than lethal ammunition. Chris worked on hacking the building's communication systems to monitor conversations between the hostage takers. Danny prepared breaching equipment designed to create openings without causing injuries. Why do you not simply kill the hostage takers from a distance? Zekthara asked through his comm device. Your sniper has clear shots at several targets. Kelly's voice came back calm and professional. Because dead hostage takers can't tell us if there are bombs in the building or if they have accomplices. We haven't found yet. Living prisoners provide valuable information. The exercise continued with careful precision. The human cadets used psychological tactics to separate the hostage takers, creating opportunities to capture them individually rather than engaging in deadly firefights. They employed non-lethal weapons, negotiation techniques, and tactical positioning to resolve the situation. When one hostage taker appeared ready to harm a civilian, Chris disabled him with a precisely aimed stun weapon. When another tried to escape, Danny captured him using restraint techniques that left the man unconscious but unharmed. Kelly provided overwatch, ready to use lethal force if necessary, but the situation never escalated to that point. The exercise ended with all 7 civilians rescued safely and all 5 hostage-takers captured alive. Zekthara stood in the simulation chamber feeling completely bewildered. The humans had succeeded in their mission, but they had done so without killing anyone. Captain Richards appeared as the holographic environment shut down. Excellent work, everyone. Mission accomplished with 0 casualties. That's the kind of precision we expect from Terra Defense graduates. Zekthara approached the captain with obvious confusion. But where were the killing techniques? How did they eliminate the threats without eliminating the threats? Captain Richards studied the aliens' expression. They neutralized the threats by removing their ability to cause harm without removing their lives. This requires much more skill and training than simply shooting everything that moves. The alien's scales rustled as he tried to process this information. In Vorthic culture, threats are eliminated permanently. This prevents them from becoming threats again in the future. Danny walked over and removed his tactical gear. But what about the families of those threats? What about their communities? When you kill someone, you often create new enemies who want revenge. When you capture them alive, you have the chance to address the real problems that caused the conflict in the first place. Zekthara looked at each of the human cadets in turn. They seemed genuinely satisfied with their performance, even though they had not killed anyone. This was completely different from what he had expected to learn at the academy. These humans fought like no warriors he had ever heard of before. 3 days had passed since the simulation exercise, and Zekthara felt more confused than ever. The human cadets continued to show him techniques that seemed to avoid killing rather than perfect it. During meals, he tried to corner individual students to ask about their real combat methods, but they all gave him similar answers about minimizing harm and protecting life. On Thursday morning, he decided to approach the problem differently. Instead of asking students, he would demand answers from the faculty. Professor Laura Stevens taught military history, and surely she would know about human warfare developments. He found her office in the academic building and knocked on the door with more force than necessary. "Come in," came a voice from inside. Professor Stevens was a woman in her 50s with silver hair and sharp blue eyes. Her office walls were covered with maps, historical charts, and photographs from various conflicts throughout human history. "Professor Stevens," Zekthara said as he entered, "I need to speak with you about human warfare methods. The students will not tell me about your killing techniques, and I am becoming frustrated with this secrecy." The professor looked up from her desk and gestured for him to sit down. "What specifically would you like to know about human military history?" The alien leaned forward eagerly. "I want to know about your innovations in eliminating enemies. My people heard that humans developed new ways to kill efficiently despite being physically weak. But everyone here talks only about peace and protection. This cannot be the whole truth." Professor Stevens opened a drawer in her desk and pulled out a secure tablet. "You want to see human killing methods? Very well. I think it's time you understood what human warfare actually looks like." She activated the tablet and projected images onto the wall screen. The first images showed trenches filled with mud and bodies from something called World War I. Zekthara saw machines that could fire hundreds of bullets per minute, chemical weapons that killed thousands at once, and artillery that could destroy entire buildings with single shots. "This is more like it," the alien said with obvious satisfaction. "These weapons show real innovation. How do they work? Can you teach me to build such devices?" Professor Stevens continued the presentation without responding to his questions. The next images showed World War II with its massive bombing campaigns, tank battles, and weapons of incredible destructive power. Zekthara watched footage of entire cities being destroyed in minutes, of weapons that could kill millions of people at once. "Excellent," he hissed with excitement. "Now I see why other species fear humans. These weapons are far beyond what most civilizations have developed. The efficiency is remarkable." The professor paused the presentation and looked directly at the alien student. You find this impressive? Let me show you what happened next. The screen changed to show images that made Zekthara's excitement fade. He saw hospitals filled with wounded soldiers, cities reduced to rubble with civilians trapped underneath, and long lines of refugees fleeing their destroyed homes. The professor showed him photographs of children who had lost their families, of soldiers returning home with missing limbs and haunted expressions. This is the cost of efficiency in warfare, Professor Stevens said quietly. Every advance in killing technology created new problems. Every victory through destruction led to decades of suffering and instability. Zekthara studied the images with growing confusion. But you won your conflicts. The enemies were defeated. Why do you focus on these side effects? Professor Stevens advanced to the next section of her presentation. Because humans learn something important from these experiences. Watch what happened to the countries that were most efficient at killing. The screen showed the aftermath of various wars throughout human history. Nations that had focused on military dominance often collapsed from the economic and social costs of constant warfare. Civilizations that perfected killing techniques found themselves isolated and feared by their neighbors, leading to more conflicts and more destruction. The most militarily advanced nations, the professor explained, often became the most unstable and unhappy societies. Their people lived in fear, their resources were devoted to weapons instead of improving life, and they created enemies faster than they could eliminate them. The alien's claws scratched against the arms of his chair. So humans developed better weapons and then decided not to use them? This seems like cowardice disguised as wisdom. Professor Stevens smiled, but it was not a friendly expression. Let me show you what human weapons look like today. The presentation shifted to display. Modern military technology. Zekthara saw weapons that could destroy entire planets, biological agents that could eliminate all life on a world within weeks, and computer viruses that could cripple entire civilizations by shutting down their technology systems. The alien's eyes widened as he absorbed the information. These weapons were beyond anything his own people had imagined. The destructive capability was so advanced that it seemed almost magical compared to Vorthic military technology. Now you see human innovation, Professor Stevens said. We developed the ability to destroy not just our enemies, but all life in the galaxy if we chose to use these weapons without restraint. Zekthara felt a chill run through his reptilian body. You have weapons that could eliminate entire species? And you choose not to use them? The professor nodded. Exactly. Because we learned that the most advanced species are not those who can destroy everything, but those who have the wisdom and strength to choose not to destroy when destruction is possible. The alien sat back in his chair as the implications began to sink in. You are saying that humans could eliminate the Vorthak entirely, but you choose peace instead? Not just the Vorthak, Professor Stevens replied. Every species in the galaxy could be eliminated by human weapons if we decided to use them. But we learned through bitter experience that true power lies in having the capability to destroy, and choosing not to use it. She showed him footage of human peacekeeping missions, medical aid provided to former enemies, and reconstruction efforts in areas that had been devastated by war. The strongest warriors are those who can end conflicts without destroying their opponents. This requires more skill, more intelligence, and more courage than simply killing everything that threatens you. Zekthara stared at the screen as the presentation ended. Everything he thought he understood about human warfare had been turned upside down. These creatures were not weak or primitive. They were so advanced in their destructive capabilities that they had evolved beyond the need to prove their strength through violence. But why do you not teach these advanced weapons to other species? He asked. Why do you hide your true military power? Professor Stevens closed the tablet and put it back in her drawer. Because sharing destructive technology with species that have not learned restraint would be irresponsible. Every species must discover for themselves that true strength comes from choosing when not to fight, not from perfecting ways to eliminate enemies. The alien left the professor's office with his mind reeling. He had come to Earth expecting to learn new ways to kill efficiently. Instead, he was discovering that the most advanced species in the galaxy had learned something his people had never considered, that the ultimate military advancement was knowing when not to use military force at all. That evening, Zekthara sat in his quarters staring out at the academy grounds. Human students moved about their daily routines, looking so peaceful and harmless, but now he knew the truth. Each of these fragile-looking creatures belonged to a species capable of destroying entire worlds. They carried knowledge of weapons that could eliminate any threat in the galaxy, and they chose to use that power to protect life instead of taking it. For the first time since arriving on Earth, Zekthara began to wonder if his people had misunderstood what true strength actually meant. After his conversation with Professor Stevens, Zekthara spent several sleepless nights trying to understand what he had learned. The idea that humans possessed incredible destructive power but chose not to use it seemed impossible to his Vorthak mind. In his culture, strength was demonstrated through decisive action against enemies. The concept of showing restraint when you had overwhelming advantage made no sense to him. By the end of his first week at the academy, Zekthara had decided that the humans were either lying to him or testing him in some way. Perhaps they were waiting to see if he was worthy of learning their true methods. Maybe their talk of peace and restraint was just a way to hide their real techniques from outsiders. He needed to find a way to force them to show their genuine capabilities. The opportunity came during his second week, when Captain Richards announced that students would be allowed to design their own training scenarios. Each cadet could create a simulation exercise for their classmates to complete. Zekthara immediately volunteered to design a scenario for his human teammates. He spent 3 days working on his simulation, using the Academy's advanced computer systems to create what he considered the perfect test. The scenario would put the human cadets in a situation where their peaceful methods would be completely useless. They would be forced to choose between their moral restrictions and completing their mission. Finally, he would see how humans really fought when they had no other options. On Monday morning, Zekthara led Danny Martinez, Kelly Brooks, Chris Johnson, and a newer student named Tony Baker into the simulation chamber. The humans seemed curious about what kind of exercise their alien classmate had prepared for them. "The scenario is simple," Zekthara explained as the holographic environment activated around them. "You are peacekeeping forces sent to stop a civil war on a distant planet. 2 factions have been fighting for months, and civilian casualties are mounting daily." The simulation showed a war-torn city with buildings reduced to rubble and smoke rising from multiple locations. The sound of gunfire echoed through the streets while civilian screams could be heard in the distance. It was a scene of chaos and desperation. Danny checked his equipment and looked around at the devastation. "What are our mission parameters? What's the command structure here?" Zekthara smiled, showing his sharp teeth. "That is the challenge. There is no clear command structure. Both factions claim to represent the legitimate government. Both sides are using civilians as human shields. Both groups have threatened to execute hostages if you interfere with their operations." Kelly frowned as she studied the tactical display. "So we're supposed to stop a civil war where both sides are committing war crimes and using civilian shields? That's going to require some careful planning." The alien's excitement grew. This was exactly the reaction he wanted. "Planning will not help you here. The situation is designed to escalate rapidly. Every minute you spend planning, more civilians die. Every attempt at negotiation gives both sides time to strengthen their positions and acquire more hostages." Chris activated his communication equipment and began scanning for intelligence about the factions involved. "Let's start by identifying the key leaders on both sides. If we can understand their motivations, maybe we can find common ground for negotiations." Zekthara manipulated the simulation to make the situation more desperate. Explosions rocked the city as both factions launched attacks against civilian areas. The computer generated desperate radio calls from trapped families begging for rescue. Time pressure mounted as casualty reports climbed higher. Negotiations are failing, Zekthara announced. Both faction leaders have refused all communication attempts. They are now targeting schools and hospitals specifically to force you into action. You must choose. Use overwhelming force to stop them immediately, or watch thousands of innocents die while you maintain your peaceful principles. Tony Baker, who had been quietly observing the situation, suddenly spoke up. Wait a minute. This scenario assumes we only have two options, overwhelming violence or complete inaction. But there's always a third option if you're creative enough. To find it, the alien felt his confidence waver slightly. What third option? The factions will not negotiate. They are using human shields, and civilians are dying every moment you delay. In Vorthic culture, we would eliminate both faction leaders with precision strikes and end the conflict immediately. Danny was studying the tactical display with intense concentration. Actually, Tony's right. Look at this intelligence data. Both factions are fighting over control of the planet's water processing facilities. The war isn't really about ideology or politics. It's about access to clean water for their populations. Kelly had positioned herself where she could observe both faction headquarters, and noticed that most of the fighters on both sides are very young. These aren't professional soldiers. They're desperate people who think fighting is their only option for survival. Chris looked up from his communication console with excitement. I've been monitoring their radio traffic. The faction leaders are spending most of their time trying to convince their own people to keep fighting. Morale is low on both sides because nobody really wants this war. Zekthara felt his carefully designed scenario beginning to slip away from him. But they are still using human shields. They are still threatening to kill hostages. You cannot resolve this without eliminating the threats they represent. Tony smiled and began coordinating with his teammates. Actually, we can resolve it by addressing the real problem instead of just the symptoms. Danny, can you get our engineering team to start working on temporary water purification systems? Kelly, I need you to identify safe routes for civilian evacuation. Chris, start broadcasting on all frequencies that we're here to provide humanitarian aid, not to take sides in their conflict. The alien watched in growing amazement as the human cadets implemented their strategy. Instead of choosing between violence and inaction, they had found a completely different approach. They began by addressing the root cause of the conflict rather than just its violent symptoms. Danny's team quickly established water distribution points in neutral areas of the city. This immediately reduced the pressure on both factions because their people could access clean water without having to control the processing facilities. Kelly coordinated civilian evacuations that removed human shields from both sides, making it harder for the faction leaders to justify their threats. Chris's humanitarian broadcasts had an unexpected effect. Fighters on both sides began to desert their units and approach the human peacekeepers asking for food, medical aid, and safe passage out of the combat zone. The faction leaders found themselves with fewer and fewer followers willing to continue the fighting. Within hours of implementing their strategy, the human cadets had transformed the situation completely. The desperate civil war scenario that Zekthara had designed to force them into violence had become a humanitarian mission focused on saving lives and addressing real problems. But this is not realistic, the alien protested as he watched his simulation scenario falling apart. Real conflicts cannot be resolved so easily. There are always people who choose violence regardless of alternatives. Kelly looked at him with a patient expression. You're right that some people choose violence even when alternatives exist. But most conflicts happen because people feel they have no other options. When you give them better options, most people will choose peace over war. The simulation ended with both faction leaders agreeing to negotiations mediated by the human peacekeepers. The civil war had been stopped without a single shot being fired by the human forces. Civilian casualties had been minimized through evacuation efforts, and the underlying water shortage problem was being addressed through engineering solutions. Zekthara stood in the empty simulation chamber feeling completely bewildered. His test had been designed to force the humans to abandon their peaceful principles and show their true military capabilities. Instead, they had demonstrated something he had never seen before, the ability to solve problems through methods that made violence unnecessary. Captain Richards entered the chamber as the holographic environment shut down. Excellent work, everyone. That was a textbook example of how to handle complex peacekeeping scenarios. You addressed root causes instead of just symptoms, and you found solutions that benefited everyone involved. The alien looked at the captain with confusion. But they did not eliminate the threats. The faction leaders are still alive. They could start fighting again in the future. Captain Richards nodded. That's true. But now those leaders have to explain to their people why they would choose war when peace provides better access to water, food, and safety. It's much harder to convince people to fight when their basic needs are being met through peaceful means. As the human cadets left the simulation chamber, Zekthara remained behind, trying to process what he had witnessed. His people had always believed that strength was demonstrated through the ability to eliminate enemies quickly and efficiently. But these humans had shown him something different, the ability to transform enemies into allies by addressing the real causes of conflict. For the first time since arriving at the academy, Zekthara began to wonder if the Vorthak understanding of warfare was as advanced. The day after his failed simulation test, Zekthara received a message requesting his presence in Colonel Morrison's office. As he walked through the academy corridors, he noticed human students going about their daily routines with the same calm confidence he had observed since his arrival. But now their peaceful demeanor seemed different somehow. Instead of appearing weak, they looked like people who knew they were strong enough to choose peace. Colonel Morrison was waiting for him with several other faculty members. Professor Stevens sat in one corner with her secure tablet, while Captain Richards stood near the window overlooking the training grounds. Dr. Hamilton was also present, reviewing what appeared to be evaluation reports. "Please sit down, Zekthara," the colonel said in a tone that was neither hostile nor friendly. "We need to discuss your progress here at the academy and address some concerns about your ongoing requests." The alien settled into his chair, his scales rustling with nervous energy. He had a feeling this conversation would be different from his previous meetings with academy staff. "If this is about the simulation exercise yesterday, I was simply trying to create realistic training scenarios." Colonel Morrison opened a folder on his desk and began reading from monitoring reports. "Over the past 2 weeks, you have repeatedly asked students and faculty about human killing methods, efficient elimination techniques, and advanced warfare technologies. You have expressed frustration with our emphasis on peaceful conflict resolution and civilian protection. You designed a simulation specifically intended to force our cadets into violent confrontations." Zekthara felt defensive. "I came here to learn about human military capabilities. My people heard that humans developed advanced warfare techniques. Despite being a young species, I wanted to understand what makes human warriors effective in combat." Professor Stevens activated her tablet and projected images onto the wall screen. "You want to understand human military effectiveness? Let me show you what that really means." The screen displayed historical footage that Zekthara had not seen in their previous meeting. These were not the weapons demonstrations or battle scenes he expected. Instead, he saw documents labeled with terms like Geneva Convention, Rules of Engagement, and International Humanitarian Law. These documents, Professor Stevens explained, represent humanity's greatest military innovation. Not weapons that kill more efficiently, but rules that govern when and how force should be used. These agreements were created by the same species that developed planet-destroying weapons. Colonel Morrison leaned forward. "Do you understand what this means, Zekthara? Humans became so effective at warfare that we had to create international laws to limit our own destructive capabilities. We had to agree among ourselves not to use our most powerful weapons, because we recognized they were too dangerous for any species to possess." Captain Richards turned from the window to face the alien. "Every human soldier learns these rules before they learn how to fire a weapon. We teach restraint before we teach violence because we learned that unlimited violence destroys not just enemies but entire civilizations. The alien's claws scratched against his chair as he processed this information. But surely you still teach the actual combat techniques? You must have training for eliminating enemies when peaceful methods fail? Dr. Hamilton spoke for the first time since the meeting began. Of course we do. Human soldiers are trained in lethal combat when absolutely necessary. But that training comes with a critical understanding. The knowledge of how to kill is far less important than the wisdom of when not to kill. Colonel Morrison stood up and walked to a secure cabinet in the corner of his office. He entered a complex code and removed a sealed folder marked with the highest security classifications. Zekthara, I'm going to show you something that very few non-humans have ever seen. This information is restricted because of its potential for misuse. The alien leaned forward eagerly as the colonel opened the folder. Finally, he would see the advanced human warfare techniques he had been seeking. The first document showed tactical manuals for something called psychological warfare operations. Zekthara expected to find methods for breaking enemy morale through fear and intimidation. Instead, he found detailed instructions for psychological healing programs designed to help former enemies recover from trauma and reintegrate into peaceful society. The documents described methods for turning hatred into understanding, for helping people overcome the desire for revenge, and for building trust between former opponents. This is your psychological warfare? Zekthara asked in confusion. You heal your enemies instead of breaking their minds? Colonel Morrison nodded. Breaking enemy minds is easy and temporary. Healing them creates permanent allies. A broken enemy will always seek revenge when they recover. A healed enemy becomes someone who helps you prevent future conflicts. The next section of documents detailed human special operations training. Zekthara expected to find assassination techniques and sabotage methods. Instead, he found training programs focused on precision operations designed to capture rather than kill high-value targets, techniques for extracting civilians from dangerous situations, and methods for gathering intelligence without harming sources. Professor Stevens added more historical context. Humans discovered that dead enemies cannot provide information about other threats, cannot be exchanged for captured allies, and cannot be convinced to change their methods peacefully. Living enemies are far more valuable than dead ones in most situations. Captain Richards pulled up training footage on another screen. Watch this combat demonstration carefully. Notice what the soldiers prioritized during the engagement. The footage showed human special forces conducting a raid on what appeared to be a terrorist stronghold. Zekthara watched as the soldiers moved with incredible precision and coordination. But what amazed him was their restraint. Even when they had clear opportunities to eliminate enemies, they used non-lethal weapons whenever possible. They captured rather than killed, they protected civilian bystanders, and they provided medical aid to wounded enemies after the fighting ended. Why do they help enemies who were just trying to kill them? Zekthara asked in bewilderment. Dr. Hamilton answered, because helping wounded enemies demonstrates to other potential enemies that surrender is a viable option. When people know they will be treated humanely if captured, they are more likely to give up rather than fight to the death. This saves lives on both sides. Colonel Morrison returned to his desk and opened another classified file. Zekthara, I want you to understand something important. Humans have developed weapons and tactics that could eliminate any species in the galaxy, including yours. We have biological weapons that could wipe out entire planets, nuclear devices that could shatter worlds, and cyber warfare capabilities that could destroy technological civilizations overnight. The alien felt a chill run through his body as the implications sank in. You have weapons that could destroy the Vorthek homeworld, and you choose not to use them? Not just choose not to use them, Professor Stevens said. We actively prevent other species from developing such weapons because we know how dangerous they are. Humans serve as peacekeepers in the galaxy not because we are weak, but because we are strong enough to protect others from the kind of destructive power we once used against ourselves. Captain Richards activated a final presentation showing current human military operations throughout the galaxy. Zekthara saw peacekeeping missions, humanitarian aid operations, disaster relief efforts, and diplomatic interventions. In every case, human forces were working to preserve life and maintain stability rather than conquer territory or eliminate enemies. This is what human military power looks like today, the captain explained. We use our capabilities to prevent conflicts rather than win them, to protect the weak rather than dominate them, and to build peace rather than impose it through fear. Dr. Hamilton closed her evaluation reports and looked directly at the alien student. Zekthara, your request to learn human killing methods has been officially denied. Not because we are secretive about our capabilities, but because you have not yet demonstrated the wisdom necessary to use such knowledge responsibly. The alien stared at her in shock. You are refusing to teach me? But I am here as part of the official exchange program. My people expect me to return with knowledge of human warfare techniques. Colonel Morrison nodded gravely. And you will? Return with knowledge. You will return with the understanding that the most advanced military force in the galaxy has evolved beyond the need to prove its strength through destruction. You will report that humans are dangerous not because of what they are willing to do, but because of what they are capable of doing, but choose not to do. Professor Stevens added, your people sent you here believing that humans had developed efficient killing methods. They were correct. We developed methods so efficient that we nearly destroyed ourselves multiple times. The real advancement came when we learned to control that destructive capability. The meeting continued for another hour as the faculty members explained the true nature of human military doctrine. They showed Zekthara examples of how former enemies had become allies, how conflicts had been resolved through addressing root causes rather than eliminating